The moment they try to silence you is the precise moment you must locate your true voice. It is not the sound of panic or the rush of shouted outrage. It is the deep, steady, measured resonance of absolute, undeniable certainty, a certainty rooted not in emotion, but in fact and procedure. We have all been subjected to it. The swift, arrogant dismissal, the flippant hand gesture, designed to wave away decades of expertise, experience, and contribution. That instant where age, or any perceived vulnerability, is cynically weaponized, transformed into a marker of confusion, irrelevance, or worst of all, a convenient excuse for those seeking to seize control. The prevailing narrative tells us that outrage is the only valid response. We are conditioned to meet heat with equal or greater heat. But this is the fundamental, debilitating trap. When you allow your voice to rise, when you surrender to the spike of visible emotion, they gain the immediate advantage. They are skilled at dismissing the resulting noise. They label your legitimate distress as hysteria, irrationality, or the inevitable, sad decline of competence. In that moment of emotional response, they do not just win the argument, they invalidate the person presenting it. There exists a demonstrably superior path. It is quieter. It is surgical. Better than any shout, the exact rule, cited precisely, which ends the argument instantaneously. The Regional Planning Committee meeting was heading toward chaos. Control was fluid. Alliances were shifting. No one truly grasped the underlying legal hierarchy until the founder, in his quiet, resolute way, decided to stand up and anchor the proceedings back to their constitutional bedrock. This is the story of Elias Vance. Elias understood that true command requires zero volume. It demands the deployment of one small, powerful, utterly unassailable gesture, coupled with the profound, necessary courage to remain perfectly still, physically and emotionally, while the ground violently shifted and collapsed beneath his unprepared opponent. Elias was far more than an observer. He was the institutional memory made flesh. He was a founding member of the Regional Planning Committee, RPC, and 3 decades prior, he had personally dedicated countless hours to drafting the city charter, the legal foundation upon which the entire governance structure was built. Now, comfortably in his 70s, he occupied a vital position, the founder's directorate authority. It was a role that, while often ignored by the daily machinery, carried immense, dormant power. The new director, Marcus Thorne, represented everything. Elias was not. Young, aggressively ambitious, steeped in corporate jargon, and pathologically allergic to institutional history. Marcus viewed Elias and the other legacy members not as anchors of stability, but as sentimental, slow-moving relics, costly friction hindering his aggressive, short-term, profit-driven development agenda. Marcus's plan required speed. Elias represented caution and complexity. The inevitable collision occurred during the monthly RPC public session, a high-stakes, televised event. Marcus, projecting supreme confidence, was presenting a complex, sweeping resolution. This resolution proposed a total restructuring of the founding board, citing vague modernization requirements and streamlined efficiency metrics. The transparent intended consequence of this vote was the effective, immediate stripping of voting power and oversight rights from Elias and the entire Founders Directorate. Marcus concluded his presentation with a practiced, thinly veiled smile as Elias rose from the back and approached the public microphone, the microphone designated for general citizen grievances. "Welcome, Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his tone dripping with patronizing formality. He used Elias's surname with an audible emphasis designed to relegate him immediately to the status of a disgruntled citizen, filing a complaint about noise pollution or a pothole, rather than a co-architect of the city itself. You have strictly 60 seconds allocated for public comment, and I must remind you that your comments must be unrelated to the current agenda item being debated by the board. Elias paused. 60 seconds. That narrow, shrinking window was meant to contain and confine 30 years of dedication, profound structural authority, and critical knowledge. The room was packed. Several local news cameras were rolling, capturing every facial expression, every subtle shift in posture. The common fatal mistake in this scenario is always the same: rushing the delivery, attempting to cram years of vital context and constitutional history into that impossibly small, sanctioned window of time. The natural inclination is to speak faster, raising the pitch, trying desperately to explain the validity of one's position. Elias had succumbed to that frustration before. He'd stumbled, infuriated, trying to outline the historical nuances, only to be cut off mid-sentence by the moderator's sharp gavel, dismissed outright as an incoherent, rambling, disorganized impediment to progress. That mistake had cost him leverage. This time, however, Elias was immaculately prepared. His preparation was not emotional, it was procedural. He carried 3 specific, tangible items: a slim, leather-bound volume, the official, authenticated RPC charter, his reading glasses, which signaled careful scrutiny, and the cool, heavy certainty derived from his meticulous preparation. He did not rush. He placed the heavy charter book gently, deliberately, onto the glass podium. The single, simple, profound act of placing the physical official proof, not shouting the words, but setting the evidence, instantly recalibrated the energy and the tension in the entire room. It was a silent, formal declaration of war. Marcus leaned forward, his patience evaporating. "Time is definitively running, Mr. Vance. Please proceed." Elias did not react to the provocation. He had already performed his essential ritual. Pabliterot, the 10-minute justice prep, calibrating for procedural authority. 10 minutes prior to walking into the pressurized atmosphere of the meeting, Elias sat alone in his sedan in the parking garage. This session was never about rehearsing arguments or compiling emotional grievances. It was a deeply focused, strategic calibration of his entire physical and mental presence, specifically designed to radiate quiet, unassailable authority. Where 1. Centered diaphragmatic breathing, 3 minutes. Elias initiated a series of low, slow, deep breaths, focusing acutely on the weight of his feet pressing into the floor mats and the feeling of the heavy leather charter book resting in his lap. The mantra was simple: less panic, more proof, exponentially more power. This ensures that the voice, when it finally emerges, originates not from the high, anxious chest, but from the diaphragm, resulting in a low, resonant, steady tone. The low voice is the undeniable voice of authority. It bypasses emotional reaction and cuts directly through the static of doubt. This deep physical rooting prevents the body from displaying the microaggressions of fear or haste, eliminating nonverbal tells of instability. 2. Strong posture and physical anchor, 2 minutes. He meticulously adjusted his bearing, shoulders back, the spine straight and tall, chin held perfectly parallel to the floor, never angled up in aggression, never dipping down in supplication. This was an internal, absolute adjustment of self-perception. I deserve to be here. My competence is non-negotiable and undeniable. I am the physical embodiment of the founding principles of this organization. He physically grounded himself, anticipating the coming emotional assault. 3. Policy check and minimal scripting, 3 minutes. He opened his notes app, not a full explanation or rebuttal, which would allow them to interrupt, but the bare procedural minimum required to force their compliance. He identified and isolated 3 critical components: the exact specific article number, Article 4, the exact specific section, Section B, the precise, neutral, formal phrase of demand. I require that the individual currently presiding as chair confirm the binding status of Article 4, Section B, Subclause 2, regarding the irrevocable mandates of the Founders Directorate Authority, and simultaneously provide immediate access to the committee minutes documenting all procedural votes from the last 3 calendar years. 4. Allies and Evidence Protocol, 2 minutes. Ilyas immediately texted Sarah, his trusted ally positioned strategically on the second row. The message was succinct. Recording ready. Stand by for the charter reference. Do not speak. Just record and confirm the cited text. He ensured his eyes were perfectly level, steady and focused, not darting or jittery, signaling preemptive competence and control. The immediate, profound benefit of this ritual, instantaneous leverage. When an individual is physically and mentally centered, the peripheral noise recedes, allowing them to instantly perceive the tactical opening. When the individual remains perfectly quiet and steady, the noise of their opponent's confusion, arrogance, and inevitable panic becomes amplified into the central event. Back at the podium, Marcus was now visibly, poorly concealing his annoyance, mistaking Elias's silence for incompetence or stage fright. Mr. Vance, I reiterate my warning. I will have the technician officially cut your microphone access if you do not immediately begin speaking within the remaining 30 seconds. Elias simply looked directly at Marcus. His gaze was steady, calm, penetrating. He spoke 3 highly deliberate sentences, slowly, calmly, without allowing his voice to ascend above a controlled, formal library whisper. The lack of volume forced the room to strain to hear, drawing them in. I am not here for the purpose of submitting public comment. He paused for 5 full seconds, allowing the statement to sink in. The cameras remained rolling, capturing the rigid faces of the board. I am formally here to ensure that the individual presiding as chair adheres strictly and completely to the committee's foundational, unamended charter. He paused again, reaching out a single finger and touching the cover of the official leather book. Policy beats ego every single time. Marcus, operating solely on ego and momentum, attempted a swift, decisive move to reclaim control. You are definitively out of order, Mr. Vance. Security, please escort Mr. Vance immediately and respectfully back to the seating area. We must proceed with the vote. The single, most crucial, impact-maximizing action Elias took next was this. He did not move his feet an inch. He did not engage with or argue with the approaching security officers. He simply kept his posture rigid and unyielding, and then pointed one finger, steady, unmoving, radiating authority, at a specific bolded line of text on the cover of the RPC charter resting on the podium. The room, moments ago, buzzing with impatience, went dead silent. The gravity of the confrontation had shifted from a grievance to a formal procedural challenge. Sarah, his designated ally, had already successfully hit the record button on her mobile device. The high-quality Hall microphone captured every word spoken at the podium, documenting the procedural violation in real time. Then, Ilyas delivered the single sentence that instantly stops the entire table, regardless of political maneuvering or ego. It was not a question or an appeal. It was a demand for structural compliance. I formally require that the chair, Ms. Chen, immediately utilize the authority of her office to confirm the binding validity and current status of Article 4, Section 2, Subclause B of the founding document. He paused, allowing the sheer weight and formal, dry language to land with its full paralyzing force. That specific clause states, in explicit terms, that the Founders Directorate Authority holds an irrevocable, non-voting oversight and veto position in the event of any proposed fundamental restructuring of the committee or its charter. Marcus scoffed loudly, attempting to dismiss the citation with performative bravado. That obscure rule is clearly obsolete. It is a historical footnote that has not been referenced in 20 years. It is only legally obsolete, Director Marcus, Ilyas stated, dropping his voice slightly lower, intensifying the gravity. If the body, acting through a formal, documented resolution, officially voted to amend that specific section of the founding charter, Therefore, I formally require that the chair display for the record the specific minutes documenting the 2/3 majority vote required by Article 12 for the successful amendment of that clause. Silence is not an absence of sound. It is compelling evidence of unpreparedness. The room held its collective breath. The assembled board members and observers began to realize with horrifying clarity that this man, this confused old man, had just cited a foundational legal text that none of the highly paid current executive staff, including the ambitious director, seemed to know existed or had bothered to check. The chair, Ms. Chen, a pragmatist suddenly faced with profound legal liability, looked physically pale. She grasped the immediate stakes. She knew that if Elias was correct, they were facing a total nullification of the entire day's agenda and potential civil litigation. She quickly and formally asked the committee counsel to immediately verify the reference in the physical document on the podium. Counsel, heart-hammering, snatched the RPC charter and flipped desperately through its pages. It took 30 seconds for him to locate the reference. 30 seconds of excruciating, weaponized silence for Marcus, whose smile had dissolved into a mask of pure dread. 30 seconds that felt like an hour for Elias, who held his posture perfectly, steady, unyielding, relying only on the document. When the counsel reached the reference page, he was forced to read the sentence aloud into the microphone. It confirmed Elias's claim precisely, word for word. The Founders Directorate authority did indeed exist, and critically, it required that any vote proposing fundamental restructuring must be unanimously approved by their directorate, a condition that Marcus had obviously ignored. The look on Marcus's face was total, public, and immediate defeat. He hadn't just attempted to sideline an elder member. He had casually violated the core, constitutional governance structure of the entire $800 million organization. The common, emotional mistake at this juncture would be to gloat, to launch into a detailed explanation of Marcus's ignorance, or to demand an apology. The correct procedural action is to calmly and formally ask for accountability from the person with legitimate authority. Elias looked directly at Ms. Chen, maintaining his steady volume. Ms. Chen, I formally request immediate accountability for the unauthorized, legally invalid introduction of a vote that fundamentally violates the committee's founding document. This gross, willful action casts serious, actionable doubt on the current director's fundamental fiduciary competence. This was the strategic pivot. Big assets, bigger dignity. Elias did not seek an emotional victory or an apology. He leveraged the language of formal governance. Fiduciary competence. This phrase, unlike emotional complaints, triggers mandatory legal and contractual review. The immediate outcome was swift, necessary, and public. Ms. Chen, desperate to protect the RPC from total legal collapse, immediately suspended the entire vote, ordered all related documentation seized, and placed Director Marcus Thorne on immediate administrative leave, pending a thorough internal investigation into his contract compliance and procedural integrity. The proof that ends the excuse, the evidence that cannot be argued against, Elias later reflected to Sarah, is always, always written down, waiting for the person brave enough to cite it. The systemic fix followed within 72 critical hours. The RPC, under intense internal and public scrutiny, was forced to restore full voting and oversight rights to the Founders Directorate, acknowledging their fundamental role. Marcus's contract was terminated, not for the emotional charge of ageism, though that was the core motivation, but for the clean, formal, professional charges of gross procedural negligence and violation of fiduciary trust. This precise, formal consequence prevented him from simply resigning and moving seamlessly into another high-level position elsewhere. His reputation was justly destroyed by the very rules he ignored. The paramount lesson of Elias's quiet victory is this: the most effective justice tool never shouts. It calmly and correctly cites. We must fundamentally shift the battleground. Stop engaging in the exhausting, unwinnable fight of emotional self-defense and pivot toward the unassailable fortress of procedural demand. When faced with condescension, microaggressions, or overt abuse rooted in any form of bias, your focused energy must instantly shift away from trying to convince them of your inherent worth. Your mission is only to confirm, document, and demand accountability for their explicit violation of the standing rules. 3 calm, disciplined steps guarantee one loud, irreversible result. 1. Identify the concrete policy source. You must know the exact specific rule, the exact policy number, the formal contractual clause, or the specific bylaw they are violating, or more powerfully, the specific legal safeguard you are invoking. Read the deed, the employment contract, the company manual, the HOA rules, the bylaws, the city charter, or the patient rights document. They depend entirely on your ignorance of these foundational texts. They assume you will only resort to generalized, refutable complaints. Your depth of procedural knowledge is your primary shield. You must become the foremost expert in the documentation that governs your specific situation. Expansion detail. Policy depth. If citing an employee handbook, know not just non-discrimination policy, but Section 3.A2, Prohibited Actions, Retaliation Clause. If citing an HOA rule regarding noise, know the specific decibel limit and the mandatory enforcement escalation process outlined in the CCRs, Article 7, Subsection C. If you are invoking a patient's right to review medical records, cite the specific HIPAA Statute 45, CFR Part 164.524, which requires a response within 30 days. This level of detail makes the rebuttal impossible. Strategic application. Before any major meeting, write down 3 policy numbers that protect your position. Memorize the opening sentence of each clause. This prevents scrambling under pressure. 2. Document proof and establish an ally protocol. Ensure your evidence is immediately ready and irrefutable. A screenshot, a time-stamped photograph, a reference note in your cloud folder, a recorded audio file. Crucially, you must ensure one trusted ally, a colleague, a friend, a family member, knows precisely what procedural action you are about to execute and is tasked only with witnessing, recording, or confirming the cited text. Allies transform a subjective conflict into an objectively documented event. Your ally must be primed not to emotionally intervene, but to strictly perform the procedural task. Did you hear him cite Article 4, Section 2, Subclause B, yes or no? Expansion detail, documentation integrity. Always use neutral, official tools. If recording audio, use a secondary device to record the physical act of the aggressor attempting to shut down the recording, documenting attempts at evidence tampering. If using text, send the formal citation to the aggressor via a traceable email before the interaction, establishing a paper trail of the procedural notice. Documentation must be clean, verifiable, and neutral in tone. 3. Demand the responsible authority, using formal language. Never, under any circumstances, waste your prepared policy citation negotiating or arguing with the low-level aggressor, the Marcus, the dismissive clerk, the hostile manager. They do not possess the authority to reverse the violation or provide the necessary remedy. Your focus must be exclusively on the highest person responsible for upholding institutional integrity. Calmly, professionally, and without a spike of emotion, insist on the presence of the person in charge of policy implementation, or the specific manager responsible for contractual compliance. Then, and only then, reference the written policy. This forces the conflict to escalate vertically, placing the procedural liability squarely on the executive chain of command. Expansion detail, language of demand. Avoid passive phrases like, "I think this is wrong." Use imperative, policy-driven phrasing. Pursuant to the explicit language of Policy 8.A, I require that you provide documented justification for this variance. Or, I am invoking my rights under the Residential Tenancy Act, Section 44, Subsection 2, and require the property manager be notified immediately for resolution. This principle is universally applicable across every domain where bias, ego, or procedural negligence threatens your rights or dignity. In a healthcare setting, where an aide is providing negligent care or being dismissive, you do not argue about their bedside manner. You calmly ask for the facility compliance manager, place the official Patients' Rights Policy 4.b on the table, and demand documentation of the standardized care protocol for the specific instance. In a high-stakes family negotiation, concerning the division of assets or inheritance, you do not debate sentiment. You place the final deed, the will, or the trust document on the table and cite the exact clause requiring professional administration, demanding a review of the probate attorney's specific instructions, e.g., Trust Document Article 9, Fiduciary Disbursement Schedule. In the modern workplace, when facing a biased performance review or a retaliatory action, you do not defend your subjective performance. You reference the Employee Handbook's Non-Discrimination Policy, Section 14, and the mandated conflict resolution procedure, demanding an immediate formal review by HR or legal counsel based on the documented violation of procedure. In complex financial disputes involving misapplied fees or predatory lending, you do not complain about customer service. You cite the exact clause in the disclosure statement or the Federal Reserve Regulation E, Section 1005.11, Error Resolution Procedures, demanding a formal, time-bound investigation. The bias that costs you the house, the job, the financial security, or the dignity you deserve is almost always built upon the cynical assumption of your procedural ignorance. The system relies on you getting frustrated and giving up. Use demonstrable competence as your impenetrable shield. Use the authenticated written document as your precise, unavoidable weapon. Your dignity is absolutely non-negotiable. Your established competence is definitively not up for debate. Today marks the moment you cease the exhausting task of trying to explain your history and transition to the powerful position of demanding the strict, documented enforcement of the institutional rules designed to protect you. Your action. Today, commitment to justice. Prep commit right now to a single, concrete act of justice prep. Choose one action that immediately grants you measurable competence and control over your environment and rights. Practice the delivery. Set your phone to record with one single shortcut or gesture. Practice one perfect, calm, low-volume, authoritative phrase that contains a procedural demand. I formally require the policy manager's presence and an authenticated copy of the written rule, please. This is in reference to article number. Repeat this phrase 10 times until the tone is automatic and calm. Locate the cornerstone policy. Find, download, and physically save one key policy number, contractual clause, or legal statute relating specifically to your current housing, immediate financial instruments, employment rights, or medical care. Highlight the specific section that grants you a procedural right, e.g., right to appeal, right to documentation, right to remedy. Name and prime. Your ally. Choose one trusted, discreet ally. Share one possible, specific scenario where you might face aggression. Critically, share the exact sentence or policy number you will use for leverage and instruct them. If I say this number, your only job is to start recording and verify that number out loud. Then, make the firm commitment to execute the 10-minute ritual: breathing, posture, scripting, ally check. Before your next anticipated confrontation, large or small, stand tall, speak low, know your exact text. Rely on the document, not on your emotion. Tell me, what specific policy, clause, or rule are you committing to look up and memorize today? What specific scenario are you now preparing for using the language of procedure? Let us prove that calm, procedural courage is unequivocally the loudest, most effective form of justice available.